got a baby daughter, you're kind of working at a job at Oldham Borough Council on 42 quid a week or so. How did you get your first break?
So the first break come from, so I left the collective, I started Reshape. I think we was 4 to 5 months into Reshape and we had no deals, we had no income. We could, by the end of the summer, have a pipeline of around 5,000 beds, which I don't think that many people have across co-living and PBSA.
Because there's one thing, you know, having an idea about setting up a business. There's another thing actually turning it into reality. How did you actually set the business up? And how did you finance it specifically? What's been the hardest thing in terms of setting the business up?
I think that the hardest thing is probably the thing that also makes it so great is that
welcome back to another episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you're a returning listener, thank you so much for coming back. And if you're brand new to the show, welcome. It means the world that you're joining us today. So today I'm thrilled to say that I'm joined by Jermaine Browne, co-founder of Reshape Living and Ark Co-Living. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Not at all. Well, look, this has been quite a long time coming.
It has.
It has been a long time coming, and I know you're a busy man, and so I really appreciate you carving the time out to come and talk to us. You've got a fascinating background. I've been fortunate to hear a little bit about it before, and I can't wait to unpack it in a little bit more detail today. And I'm super excited to find out a little bit about, you know, Reshape Living and Ark and how you set the business up. But if we can start maybe at the beginning, can you tell me a little bit about how and why you got into real estate in the first place?
Probably by accident in one way. I think it's quite interesting. I went to the university on the premise that if you go to university, you've made it in life, because that's what my family told me. Quickly got to the realization that's not the case, in particular when you're studying sociology as a degree. And acutely aware of the lack of job opportunities in sociology. I remember there was this one module and it was called urban sociology. And he was looking at garden cities and the creation of Le Corbusier's version of garden cities, and how basically you can create fantastic communities and living spaces effectively from blank pieces of paper and land. And I was in that module and straight away I was like, this is what I want to do. And I remember speaking to the lecturer straight after it, and he's like, look, you need to go to the Masters of Civic Design, which was a couple of buildings down at the University of Liverpool, and tell him that you're interested in urban sociology and master planning, and then see what goes from there. And I remember, I think I ran down the street, highly infused, got to the front door, and there was a sign on the door, and it said basically closed for the day. So I went home, frantically Googled, learned everything I could about regeneration, was adamant I was going to be a regeneration manager. And then I think within a week, I met the head of the Masters of Civic Design. I told him my plans and my passions. And he just sat me down and said, look, you've only got 2 options. Don't do regeneration. You can either do town planning, because you can get accredited with MRTPI, or you can become a surveyor and do RICS. But whatever you do, please don't just pick a vanilla regen masters. So that's what I did. I picked town planning because I was scared of heights. So I thought I couldn't be a building surveyor. And I think the interesting thing is that when I actually was doing that deep dive into what regeneration was, I actually realized I'd come across it when I was younger. So I'm from a town called Oldham in Greater Manchester. It was one of the most deprived towns in the country for quite a while. And I remember there was this one occasion where there was a huge urban renewal project where everyone on the council estate got a new kitchen, new windows, trees got planted. We also had English partnerships as well. There was a number of developments. So I think that really was the first time I seen regeneration. I just didn't know what the name of it was. And then when I come across urban sociology and had the discussions with the Masters of Civic Design, it kind of felt like this is exactly what I want to do. And
because as a kid, you'd seen the impact
100%
of that on your back garden.
Yeah.
And you were like, right, if I can get involved with having that impact for others,
yeah,
you know, that is what you wanted to do.
And the impact was huge. Like, you would see a sense of pride in the community arise. You would see people smiling more. Like if you take single glazed windows in the middle of a home where it's freezing cold, and then now you give everyone double glazed windows. Like it breeds so much joy in a community, and I got to experience that firsthand. And then when I then had a name for what that was, I knew I wanted to pursue it straight away.
Did anyone else in your family go to university?
No, or sixth form. I was the first to go sixth form. Yeah, nearly the first to finish school, to be fair. But yeah, first to go sixth form in university.
And was that a difficult choice to finish sixth form and go to university, or did going down an alternative path appeal, or were you close to kind of doing that at any stage?
To be fair, no. I think we was talking around. It's probably 2002. I went to college, and there was just no jobs at all, really, in Oldham in particular. Even though it was somewhat of a booming economy before the crash, employment was very difficult to come around as a 16-year-old. And I always had a view that if I could go to college and university, it would give me a chance to better myself. I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew to lead a better life, I needed to change my environment. And the best way to change my environment was to go to a university in a different city, surround myself with different people, and then see where that takes me.
So you landed at Liverpool, you did your sociology and social policy, and then you went on to go and do your master's in town planning.
Yeah, exactly.
You graduated at the perfect time, 2007, 2008, to get a new job, right?
Yeah, nearly the perfect time. It's quite funny because I remember the first day on the Masters of Civic Design, the head of the department stood really proud in front of everybody. And he said, I just want to tell you all, you have made the best decision you could ever have made for a career. While the economy's good, planning's good. And he was true. Like, I think it was every week or every other week, we used to get planning magazines, and they'd be like 30, 40 pages of jobs. It was unbelievable. And then all my friends who wasn't doing planning, I could see them like unsure what they're going to do with a career. And I'm like smug, like I've picked the golden ticket here. And then come 2008, obviously everything turned, and literally Planning Magazine turned to one page of jobs. And that one page of job was often someone who had 5-10 years experience. And overnight, it completely disappeared.
So for you, I get the impression you're quite, headstrong, committed. This is what you wanted to do. It was all going really, really well. And then suddenly the rug's been pulled from underneath you.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that, and what was your approach?
Probably dealt with it with a degree of, I'd say, resilience and optimism, but it wasn't easy. I think my situation was a bit more nuanced as well, because I actually got onto Savills graduate scheme. So I think I finished third in the country.
On your course?
No, as part of the national recruit for graduates. So I finished third. I got a job offer. I think I had the choice of working in Sevenoaks or Oxford. I think I was the second person on my course to get a graduate scheme. And then months passed, dialogue disappeared, and I think it got to late summer, and I was told that the graduate scheme was no longer recruiting, and unfortunately I couldn't have that position. So I think that was a bit of a difficult blow. At that time, I was a young father as well. So, as my mum would say, only I could go to university, get a degree, master's, and a baby, which is exactly what I did. So I got my daughter when I was 19, unbelievably. And it was a very difficult time. And I think the problem that I had, and probably a lot of my peers had, is that the natural step for a lot of people, in particular after the financial crisis, was that councils was really the only people that was recruiting. The private sector really stood still. And the first question on every single LPA planning application, local planning authority application form was, what's your local planning authority experience? And it was a huge barrier to entry. And I ended up being in a situation where I graduated in the October, and then I spent 6 months trying to find work experience while signing on. on benefits. And then after that, I eventually got into Oldham Council, and I was working in the regeneration team because there was the people that responded. And I think I ended up working there for 5 months for free while living on like £42 a week on benefits. And it was challenging because you have a lot of noises around you. And I think a lot of people was like, why don't you just quit? Don't chase the dream, get a normal 9 to 5. And I think for me, it was like, I knew what the 9 to 5 was going to bring me. I knew what working in the factories again, like I did in the summer, or even like I've done like a bin man in summers. Like I'd done any job I could get when I was younger. I knew what my life would be like. And I was like, look, I've paid for my own masters myself. I have to see this through. And I think that's why I was so committed to getting the first opportunity.
So before we come on to that, as a kid, what kind of kid growing up were you?
I'd probably say I was annoyingly optimistic. I think I had a genuine belief I could be and do anything that I wanted. Something that probably stemmed from my mum and my family. We didn't have a lot, but we had a lot of love in the house. And it really created an environment where we all wanted to do more, not as individuals, but as a family unit. So it probably translated into eagerness and arrogance at times, but I think it was always from a good place.
So if I get this right, you've got a baby daughter, you're kind of working at a job at Oldham Borough Council on 42 quid a week or so. How did you get your first break?
So the first break come from continuously applying for jobs while I was at the council. And it was actually Kingston Council that provided me with my first job. I remember there was 302 applications for one graduate job. And I was fortunate to get to the interview process. I'd refined how to apply at that point. And it felt like a normal day. I think the interesting thing is that I did secure the job, and the manager at the time who appointed me, when he left, he let me into a little secret. And he said, I will be honest, Jermaine, there was 2 very strong candidates on the interview process. And he said, you both was as strong as each other. And we could have gone for either of you. But he said, I just felt that you needed it more. And I think he even referenced that the other person I was against, who was deemed to be equally good in the responses, he referenced his brother was in real estate. He referenced an uncle was in real estate. And I think that maybe, and I'm not saying it's the right thing for people to done as employees, but I think they may come to the conclusion that they're both as good as each other. One of them's got other routes that will come, and the other one is more desperate and in despair. Let's give him that. And look, if that's what it took for me to get in, I still had to apply. I still had to get to the interview. I still had to perform well. And if it was just someone being kind and seeing the desperation I was in, I was happy to take it. And it's funny because I remember the phone call. I remember I was in Oldham Council, sat there, my phone rang. I've gone into the lobby, and he was just like, you've got the job. And it was genuinely like my pursuit of happiness moment. And just to have that relief lifted from me that I would have soon what would be 21 grand a year coming in, which isn't a lot after you relocate to London, which I found out quite quickly, but it was just a stepping stone. And I think what I really liked about Kingston in particular is that it wasn't just starting off in the council, it was actually the environment and the place of Kingston. It was like going from Oldham, which in 2008 was dark, grim, real high unemployment, to then going to Kingston, which was vibrant. I remember walking around Kingston and every shop window had jobs. It was like, that's when I noticed what the north and south divide actually was. But I was made up and ready to build a new life.
So you did just over a year at Kingston before moving to Hounslow.
I did. And I actually secured, I think it was something like a 60% pay rise after a year. There was a job going at Hounslow. There was this thing called recruitment retention at the time, which was like a top up in your salary. And I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to go for it. I always felt I was underpaid at the 21 as a graduate, and yeah, I managed to get that, and it's one of them things where, and I'm a big believer of it. Once you get in the door, more doors come to you very quickly, and I think the fact that I took the decision to leave Greater Manchester, move down south, quickly other doors then followed.
So you moved from 21k to early 30s.
Yes.
In terms of your salary. Talk to me about what you were actually doing there, because you were a planning officer, right?
Yeah, so I was just a development manager officer. So I was responsible from approving rear extensions, changing fascias on shop signage, the odd drop curb. So it wasn't anything overly fancy. It was just your bread and butter stuff, but did mean a lot to people. As a duty planner, I'd have people coming in, they want to extend the house, they want to subdivide the house, they want to have guidance on how to do that. And that's very much what I did for probably the first 3 or 4 years until I started doing smaller flatted developments.
And so were you getting a qualification during your kind of professional career at this stage?
No, I think in local government planners rarely do RICS. Or RTPI, should I say. I think it's only something that you do when you're about to go to the private sector. And I followed that path where I didn't do my RTPI until I was applying for the private sector.
And in terms of the route into real estate, it's very much kind of residentially orientated type projects rather than kind of commercial institutional grade projects at that stage.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. It was just, residential properties. I think I did do a data centre, which was my first major application at Great West Quarter Road, out near Heathrow. But beyond that, it was probably 90% residential.
And were you doing the role that you always thought you wanted to do at this stage?
Not necessarily, because I think development management's a lot more process driven than I would have expected it to have been, in particular with that desire to be involved in regeneration. I think junior officers, you kind of have to earn your stripes first, and then you very much take step by step, where you do rear extensions, then you'll do 5 houses, 10 houses, and then all of a sudden you've shown you're good and you get 200 and you're like, oh my God, how do I do this? So it's very much you learn as you go. And I think once you're probably like 4 to 5 years in, depending on the borough you are, you then get exposure to determining master plans and stuff.
So you moved to a few different councils over that 5-year period, if I'm not mistaken, Hounslow, and then Selby, and then Havering. Why did you kind of make the move? And by moving every couple of years or what have you, what did that give you that just staying in one place wouldn't have done?
Typically a pay rise. I think you've got an unfortunate situation, which it's not just in local government, but it's often easier to get a pay rise by going to a new council rather than getting promoted within. And when you do get promoted within, I think it's quite rigid, the steps you're meant to take. So I think you'll find often in public sector, we just jump around the councils just to allow us to get that pay rise. Selby was a bit of a left curve one. As you probably know, it's not in London. It's actually out near Leeds and Harrogate. And look, that was my attempt of trying to just get back up north to be closer to my family. But ultimately, it didn't really work. And I decided to go back to London because I just felt there was more opportunity, and being back up north, there was just a risk of stagnation. So I decided to go back.
You spent 3 years as a team leader at London Borough of Tower Hamlets.
And a principal, so not all of it, but yeah.
And a principal.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that experience.
It was fantastic. And it was quite interesting because even though I said I often move for a pay rise, I actually didn't move to Tower Hamlets for a pay rise. I actually moved to Tower Hamlets to get a permanent contract to allow me to buy a house. And I decided to take a pay cut, and I actually think it was one of the best moves I ever did because the exposure of the schemes that we had in Tower Hamlets was unbelievable. So I was responsible for a lot of the banks that got approved on Canary Wharf. So there was one Home and Key West, and also number 10 Home and Key West. So that was great. Worked on a number of towers which were like 65 stories high. new schools.
So you transitioned away from doing the smaller residential stuff to the big corporate.
And it comes slowly, but then councils like Tower Hamlets, Southwark, Lewisham, like it's sink or swim, and they've got so many big projects and not a lot of staff. You quickly get thrown in at the deep end, and I think it's something I thrived in and really enjoyed. And I think that gave me the confidence for the next steps that I then made, and it also probably increased my value as well to the private sector, having navigated the complexity of those planning applications from a local planning authority perspective.
Can you just talk about what those challenges are?
I think you need a detailed understanding of plans, and I think when you are reviewing thousands of planning applications, you really develop a keen eye, and that keen eye can translate into how to improve a design, to improve the viability of a scheme. It could be to see where that extra 10-20% margin is for a business plan. Also as well, gauging the level of harm that a development has to the public benefits. I think that's really ingrained in local planning authorities, and you then take that to the private sector. You kind of know where to push and pull. Obviously, there's always a negotiation, but I think it just gives you an in-depth understanding of how people think, why people think. And I think when I was at Tower Hamlets, I was very passionate about delivering affordable housing. And any developer that come in, I'd tell them they're going to be at the level of affordability they need to be, and I would just drag them there. But I would maybe be more relaxed on the height, more relaxed on the density, as long as they was getting the homes that people needed.
And you were reconciling this against a wider master plan or framework that the council had?
Yes, sometimes you got the local plan, then there might be an SPD or there might be a local master plan. But I think often there's a lot of autonomy for the officers, which you then confer with your team leader or the head of the department or your design officers, because often schemes put forward are beyond what is prescribed in a local plan.
So after about 10 years or so in the public sector, why did you decide to leave the public sector and move to the private sector?
I think it was probably because I knew what my life would be like if I stayed in the public sector. I think once you go from principal to team leader, it gets quite small at the top where you become the development manager and you've got the idea of head of service. And I think, I don't know the figures that people earn now, but you'd probably aim at like a 60-70 grand salary, and it might be capped at that. And I just felt like I wanted to do something new. I wanted to do something more, and I wanted to push myself. And it was quite interesting because the public sector was one of 3 options that I had in my head. And those were to do a PhD. And I even put a proposal together to the University of, was it UCL, sorry? So I put a proposal to UCL to do the PhD. They said they'd be happy to have me. I was also considering doing a barrister course as a planning barrister, which would have been probably a disastrous decision because I'm like severely dyslexic, but I thought I had a keen eye to read certain words and come to different conclusions.
So barrister course and a PhD, okay.
Well, or a PhD.
Or a PhD, yeah, fine.
Or go private sector.
Or go private sector.
And the private sector one was the one I went with. And I remember speaking to just friends and family, and I think a lot of people was like, do you know what, just go for it, because you don't know where it's going to lead you, and the public sector will always be there. And that's what gave me the impetus to start that next chapter.
Property is a people business, hence the name People, Property, Place. Business has been tough the last couple of years. Get the people aspect wrong, business becomes impossible. Get the people aspect right, it's still hard, but it's manageable, much more enjoyable, and you're much more likely to hit your goals. So if you're looking to add top talent to your team in 2025 and you're open-minded to an alternative approach and you're keen to make business a little less hard, drop me a DM. I'd love to have a conversation with you to see how Rockborn could potentially help you with your human capital requirements. Right, let's get back to the podcast. So you landed at Savills, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And obviously at the top of this conversation, we spoke about how you got your first job opportunity officially at Savills that was then revoked. Is that your homecoming moment?
I think it was, to be fair. Look, I'm never one to hold grudges at all. I think everything happens for a reason. And it was quite interesting because the lady who onboarded me at Savills recognised me. And she's like, we've crossed paths before, haven't we? And I was like, yes. She's like, when and how? And I just explained, and she just apologised profusely for that. And I said, look, it was completely fine. To be fair, I think it was a good thing I didn't get into Savills straight away, because as I said, I was extremely dyslexic. So I actually was diagnosed with dyslexia after I finished my degree. And I only did the test for dyslexia after my degree because the person who was my university mentor, he said, look, if you want to do a master, just please do the dyslexia test. I really think you're dyslexic. And then I found that I had the reading age and writing age of an 11-year-old, even though I had a degree. And I think what local government did, because of the nature of the people, is they just trained me how to write and communicate in a very simple style. And I remember just every time I'd write my delegated reports to the council, it'd just be red penned. Like, whether it's was, were, like wrong letters, the vowels was just... And I think that 10 years actually allowed me to develop a basic skill, which I probably needed in the private sector, because I do think the private sector would have been less forgiving for that. But yeah, love being at Savills, and yeah, he's provided a great platform for me.
You left that out when I said, what kind of kid were you growing up?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Optimistic,
Yeah.
positive.
Yeah, exactly.
Not
Yeah.
dwelling on that. But that's amazing that you
Yeah.
went through university, got your degree,
Yeah,
and you had the reading and writing age of an 11-year-old, having kind of
Yeah.
gone through that.
yeah. And we didn't have spell checker and Word at that point. So when I first did my degrees, I was submitting them in handwriting. So it was full exposure, laying it bare. And when people used to say to me like, "How did you pass?" I genuinely think I just tried twice as hard, like genuinely. And I remember I come up with a weird style when I was writing my like thesis and also my papers, that I would copy and paste sentence structures from the documents I like, because I knew my spelling and grammar was so poor. I thought the less I make up and the more I stitch, the more coherent and easy it would be to digest. So that's probably how I did it.
So that public sector 10-year period gave you the confidence and also the kind of the schooling effectively
Yeah.
in how to present written quality work and then manage projects through as well. So what did you do at Savills, and what was your first taste of public sector or private sector life like?
Do you know, it was actually good. I actually started off in Sevenoaks first, and really enjoyed it. I think the idea of the stripy tie and the spotty tie, I fully embraced it. I couldn't play golf, I couldn't ski, so I missed out on a few trips. But one thing I will say about Savills and some corporate entities is there was a real like sense of family and community, and I actually really liked it. And I felt I was definitely out of my comfort zone, and it was long overdue.
In terms of the work or the people or the...
I'd say the work. I think in the public sector, you're very much critiquing and pushing it back. And I think when I got to the private sector, I'm not saying it's more problem solving, but there's different aspects to the job. I've got a client. I need to convince them why I'm the right person to get them planning. I've got to do business development. I've got to negotiate on behalf of what was small developers at that point in time. So it just made me have to sit on the other side of the fence, which I think is quite important for my growth as a town planner and then later a real estate professional.
And in terms of the projects that you worked on, can you just give me a bit of a flavour of what that looked like?
Well, the first one was something called London Chest Hospital. And it was quite an interesting one because it was in Tower Hamlets. And I can't recall the planning consultancy that had it, but basically the client, which was Crest Nicholson at the time, they were just stuck in planning. It wasn't moving anywhere. I think it was quite a large acquisition for them and also Clarion. And we had an opportunity to pitch for the planning gig midway through a planning process. So there was a small team of 3 of us at Savills. I was roped in because it's in Tower Hamlets, and we pitched it and we got it. And straight away, I was then pulled out of Sevenoaks, stuck in the London office, and it was like, you're not working at Tower Hamlets for the last 3 years and doing stuff in Surrey. You're in London. So then went up to London, and I think Tower Hamlets was a great example of something where the scheme was dead underwater. I phoned the council, I spoke to him, and they was like, this is just a terrible scheme and it's not going to get approved. And I think over 4 months, we turned it around and we got a recommendation for approval. And I mean, it was like piece by piece, issue by issue, to a point where it tipped in our favour. And I think that's where I really fell in love with being on the other side of the fence and embracing challenges like that.
And do you feel that you kind of felt like you belonged a little bit more at Savills, having had such a monumental win and being able to leverage all that experience that you had from the public sector, but apply that on the private sector and obviously be pulled in as part of that hit squad to turn it around? Was that like a real case of, you kind of feel like you could, belong in that sense, and the value that you can add is realised?
Yes, but I would also say it's the point where my head started to turn. I think the interesting thing when I was at the council, I was at Tower Hamlets, is the likes of DP9 and everyone, they would turn up, they've got the suits on, they've got the ties, they're very sharp. And I was like, oh, can I be that guy? Do I want to be that guy? And then I think equally then when I was at Savills, I realised that Savills worked for a planning manager or planning director, client side. And then they would come in and tell the consultants what to do. So then I was like, can I be that guy? So I think although I had some good successes at Savills, I think very quickly I realised I wanted to be client side. And I wanted more autonomy on an actual project.
And more control.
And more control, yeah.
So the collective came calling?
They did indeed. They did indeed.
And was that a case of the collective were a client of Savills?
No, it wasn't at all. And it was a bit of a sliding doors moment, because I remember I received a LinkedIn message from someone called James Penfold, who I had no idea who that was at the time. And it said something like, hi, someone's recommended me to you. Do you want to meet up for a coffee? The collective. And when you're just probably on the go and you're not reading stuff properly, I just opened it and I didn't think about it again. And I think like 2 weeks later, I was having a coffee with someone called Mark Gibney from GVA. And then just in passing, he mentioned this name, James Penfold. And I was like, I'm sure I've got a message from this person. Looked on it, responded to the message. And from that point, my life was never the same again. I remember meeting James for a drink, non-alcoholic drink. I'm not drunk for 10 years. But I remember meeting him for a drink, and literally we hit it off. He was also a young father as well, similar to myself. Different starts in life, but similar decision making and journeys. And he actually said I think we was there for 4 hours. He said, look, we was about to offer the job to somebody else, but I'm going to tell everyone not to offer it to them. We want you instead. And then I think within a week of that, he had a job offer on my desk, and then I accepted it.
So what were you going into the collective to do?
I was going into the collective to unlock planning, because one of the issues that they had at that point was that co-living at that point was an unknown entity. You had issues around affordable housing, how it should be treated. The GLA was just anti co-living. I think they had a Stratford scheme, which I think they had in planning for 4 years before I joined. And it was just very much just unravelling the issues on the current acquisitions and making sure that the next acquisitions are done in a manner to which is going to de-risk the planning process.
And so for you, it was an opportunity to use all that public sector experience, that private sector experience, but actually be in a bit more of a driving seat in terms of, putting and drawing up the schemes and getting them through planning.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously, look, at the collective, the really good thing about the business is I think it was probably part of the reason for the downfall is that they love to have all the disciplines in-house. So you had the planning function with me and James, and then a gentleman called Harry Manley later joined, and then we had the DM team, you had interior designers. So there was a lot of creativity and autonomy within the business, so we really always knew what we wanted to do, and then we'd work with great architects to then come up with the briefs and deliver that business plan.
Talk to me about some of the other projects that you worked on at the collective.
It was wide ranging. So I think we secured 8 planning permissions in something like a 24-month period, which was over 2,000 beds at a point where there was no planning policy in favour of it. And I think there was effectively 2 different business plans that we was running. So we had the notion of what is now probably referred to as flexible stay, where someone can stay in a building from 1 day to 1 year. And then we had sui generis, which was more like affordable build to rent, but not known as affordable build to rent at that point. And it was just very much about creating those spaces for people to thrive in, have better human connection. And I think I really bought into what co-living was at the collective. And I think the interesting thing about the collective is I think a lot of people just are so easy to slate it and say, oh, they didn't know what they was doing, or they ruined the reputation of co-living. I think anyone that does co-living in the UK, they have to pay homage to the collective. They was the first movers. They delivered the first sui generis consent. They created the first operational products. And every other co-living product that follows, if it's better or not, it stems from the DNA of what the collective was. And I'm a big believer of that.
There are a lot of people that have subsequently left the collective and set up their own businesses, right?
There is.
James Scott being one of them, who's been on the podcast as
Yeah.
well. And obviously in the press, recently announced Reza is making his comeback with And Soul too.
Which was a missed marketing opportunity. So me and a gentleman called Mike Riley, who was head of PR, we always said the headline has to be resurrection, and they just didn't do it. It's such a shame.
Green Street missed the opportunity.
Yeah. And as Robbie said, being on Easter Sunday would have even been better, but
it wasn't to be.
It wasn't.
Close, but not quite. You're at the collective for nearly 2 years.
Yeah.
Before the next leg in this journey happened.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Like I think what the collective did, and I think the reason why there's so many businesses that have stemmed from the collective is, like, I genuinely, hand on heart, will say it's the best work environment I've ever worked in. And I think it's that because when you went to the collective, I think it reminded you of who you was at your core. You had this freedom of expression. And I think for me in particular, what that freedom of expression did is it reignited my entrepreneurialism. It made me want to create. It made me want to do things. And I think when you see a 29-year-old CEO walking around, you're like, how has he done this? And surely I can. And I think where we was at the collective was that we knew that there was a lot of private equity that wanted to invest into the co-living. We knew that institutional capital wasn't there, but it was on the cusp, and the likes of DT Zidai was close to forming a joint venture with the collective at that time. And we just felt like there was a genuine opportunity to provide an alternative route into co-living. And in particular, the biggest barrier to entry was the planning. Because if there's no planning, there's no pipeline, and there's nothing to invest in. So we decided to create Reshape just because we knew, one, we had confidence to get planning consents. 2, we could find land. And then thirdly, we knew we had access to small pockets of family offices. And it was just very much, let's just see how it lands. And we set it up in COVID while the world was still. And I think by the end of first lockdown, we had a detailed business plan, and we was chasing our first sites.
So you said we.
Yes.
Who is we?
So we is myself, Charlie Gaynor, and also Alex Archer. Charlie, again, fundraising specialist, very much was like the CEO. I think the term is analyst to the CEO. So he was just by Reza's side 24/7 for 3 years, which then gave him a great grasp of how to run a business. And then Alex Archer was the land guy, and Alex could always sniff a deal, find a deal, and make it happen. So between the 3 of us, look, we knew we didn't have all of the skill sets, but we felt like we had enough to kickstart the business.
So between the 3 of us, you kind of had the analytical and the financial kind of capital raising piece.
Yeah.
You had the land acquisition, and
Yeah.
then your skill set you brought to the party, the kind of the planning, the planning piece.
The no pressure bit.
The no pressure bit that everything hinged on. To unlock it all.
Yeah.
You were responsible
Yeah.
for that. How did you actually, because there's one thing, having an idea about setting up a business. There's another thing actually turning into reality. How did you actually set the business up? And how did you finance it specifically?
probably get different answers from the three of us, depending on who you ask. I'll speak from my experience. So I actually was working full time at Wirral Council, contracting. So
Having left the collective.
having left the collective, so I left the collective. I started Reshape. I think we was 4 to 5 months into Reshape, and we had no deals. We had no income. So I said to the guys, look, I want to do Reshape. I'm here to do it, but I need income. Would you guys mind if I bring in some secondary income? And they both, like, thankfully said yes. And then I was effectively working at Wirral Council full time, but with the benefit of working from home, which effectively meant I was sat there with 2 laptops. And I think that lasted for 9 months, where I was sat there with 2 laptops, probably working 12 hours a day to obviously make sure I'm putting enough time into each. And it was a tough time. But again, I think if you believe in something, you've got to go for it. I think you just got to find a solution to make it work.
Which stage your daughter was 16 or so?
She was 14 at that point.
She was 14 at that point.
Yeah.
And you had another couple of kids at this stage?
Yes, not soon after. So I've got Marley and Malia. So Marley is 2.5. So I had him midway through Reshape, and then Malia in the last 15 months. But I think I got them after Ark. I think the babies arrived after.
Fine. So you had this kind of window.
Yeah, I had the window. Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do that with kids.
Yeah, fine. So you had Wirral to kind of give you some secondary income to keep
which
the
was
lights
primary
on.
income at that point.
Which was primary income to keep the lights on.
To keep the lights on.
And then you kind of transitioned away from that.
Yeah.
Full time in terms of Reshaped. What was the premise for Reshaped, and what did you set out to kind of deliver?
I think the premise for Reshape was to provide alternative forms of living accommodation for our generation. And when I say that, I probably mean 20s, 30s, and maybe late 40s. I think I'm quite fortunate where I just about got to buy a property. I think the younger generation struggle with that. And I think as a lot of people are going to be forced into rental accommodation, I think we wanted to create something special for those generations and the tail end of our generation. And I think just passionate about placemaking and human connectivity. And I think me personally, I lived in London for 14 years and I didn't even know my neighbours in residential properties often the time. So I could really resonate with the notion of creating a building to create connectivity. And I think that was at the core of what Reshape wanted to do. We wanted to make people connect and live more fulfilling lives. And I know it's the everyday patch of what co-living is, but it's because it rings true.
What was your first deal?
So our first deal was a JV with a company called Hurlington Capital, and it was a big moment for us. It was with a gentleman called Harry and also Jamie, and it was a scheme in Woolwich, and they was looking at student, and then we was going to do co-living on it, and then we went back to student, and we got the first student consent in 6 years, and that very much was our first marker in the sand. But I don't think it was the moment that changed the full trajectory of the business. I think where our business really changed, and look, very grateful for that deal, because it then unlocked us buying another site across the road, which was 4 times bigger, known as Electric Works. But I think the turning point for us was the acquisition of something called Kalati House, which was a service department in Wembley, where we knew, because of Savills, who presented it to us off market via Generation Estates, that there was this building. It's just been PC'd. The Singaporean family office was nervous about the service apartment market, and they wanted an exit at a certain price before the management company come in. And ourselves with Generation Estates, we co-created a business plan on how to reposition that building into co-living. And I think where we differed from a lot of our competitors in co-living is what we were seeing when we were setting up with Reshape is everyone had the same business plan, which was, let's find a piece of land, let's get planning permission, build it, stabilise. And for me, that was a 7-year horizon. And I think one of the biggest issues that co-living had was the feeling that it was a substandard way of living. And I think what myself, Charlie, and Alex felt is like we need to make a statement. We need to say this is what second generational co-living is. And when we looked at the fabric of the building, the room size is 21 square meters, the level of amenity, we was like, do you know what? It's not perfect, but there's enough here to say we're now moving the dial on what co-living is. And it was the craziest 12 months of my career to date, because what we had to do as Reshape and Generation is that we basically had to run a fundraising process. So we interviewed 4 or 5 different capital partners to see if they would buy the asset with us. We ended up partnering with Cross Tree Capital. That was brokered by Savills again. So again, it goes full circle. And within 12 months, we acquired the site. We come up with a whole new detailed design on how we're going to make this new building more homely. So we're talking about basically ripping out partition walls, repainting it, redecorating it, appointing the interior designers, coming up with the new design codes for the building. Then we had to go to tender. So then we had to appoint the main contractor to do the refurb works, and also a new extension, which we had to get planning permission for, which we called the Penthouse for Everyone, because we knew the base of the building wasn't sufficient and we needed that wow factor. Then we had to create the whole brand, and then we had to hire the team. And we did all that within 12 months. I think
Just as a team of 3 of you.
just as a team of 3 with the assistance of Generation Estates, who was like very much our big brother, because like the fantastic company, the lots of success since
Kind of student accommodation is their
student
pedigree.
accommodation,
They're one of the first movers in terms
It
of
was one of the
student.
first movers, and I think they wanted to be a first mover in co-living themselves, but also assist us as well, because Charlie struck a great relationship with Nick and Alan, and I think there was just a lot of trust, and I think they may have seen in us what they once was. And it's that, look, you don't get anywhere, whether it's Hurlington or it's Generation Estates, if people don't give you a hand up in real estate, it's very difficult to get your first break. And I think that was the turning point for us, because we then sold a third of the rooms pre-opening. I think we brought the third party operator in like days before we opened the building. So it was a full and crazy 12 months. And I think the most rewarding thing of it was no one knew was doing it until we opened the building. And it was just like, here's Reshape, here's Ark, this is what co-living is to us. And I think that was probably the turning point, where you come from being chancers to actually now having a product to leverage and showcase your
And a proof
skills.
of concept.
And the proof of concept.
You touched on Ark.
Yes.
I referenced that when I introduced you.
Yes.
Can you just tell me about Ark and
Yes.
why is Ark? Yeah, where does Ark fit into the picture in comparison to Reshape?
So I'd probably say that the simplest way of saying it is like Reshape is like the development company. So we'll source the deals, we'll secure planning permissions, and then we'll look to deliver out the projects. Ark was the operational platform that we co-created with Crosstree and also Generation Estates. So that's very much the consumer facing element. So we very much always wanted to separate Ark and Reshape. I won't give specific examples, but I know of businesses where they branded the operational platform the same as the development platform, and then obviously depending on how negotiations go with private equity, you can end up losing the lot. So we was very mindful that our building would never be called Reshape. It would have to be 2 separate entities, which then gives us that flexibility, regardless of how both businesses grow.
And I assume you can, in due course, you can manage through Ark other co-living platforms that meet the criteria or what have you, or you can build and develop different products via Reshaped, and they might be an Ark product, they might be a future product, depending on the quality or the standards or the kind of the Ark way of doing things.
Yeah, so I think so with Ark, like we would never do an Ark without Crosstree, because they co-own that.
But in terms of other co-living buildings, you might operate it obviously with Crosstree.
Well, so I think the way we've now evolved our business is probably like, and look, this is not saying we think we have that pedigree or no, we might never get to it, but I think it's like the way we see it is like more like the Accor model, where Reshape are a developer, and then we will have a number of different brands underneath us. So Ark is brand one, which is now at 1,000 beds and been very successful. We've now got the new brand, which we're ready to launch for our ground up. And then depending on the strategies we have, we might have different ones as well. And the plan would be that all of them just grow.
Yeah, you'd have your own operational flag or brand
Exactly.
that would fit a particular product, depending on what you're developing.
And then the long-term plan is what we've done at Ark is now that's managed internally with an opco. So that's running itself now, which is great from our perspective. And then similar to when we're doing the next brand, which I'm trying to not mention the name of, again, we'll look to do the internalization and have the opco, and you're just creating these opportunities for then different capital to then invest in different strategies.
How we touched on the fact you were working 2 jobs, 2 laptops, 12-hour days.
Yes.
How did you actually finance the business, and how did you kind of, finance some of the pursuit of some of these deals and some of the planning? Because it's not cheap to do that.
It's quite interesting because I see the actual, I am aware of how much certain developers spend on certain pursuit costs, and we just could never afford that. And look, the truth is, like, we wouldn't be where we are without our consultants. So we're in a very fortunate position where our architects, our planners, our sunlight and daylight specialists, they will always work on a speculative basis for us up until the point of exchange, and then we will then reward them handsomely. And it's just about building trust on our ability to perform and get the deal over the line for them. And it's worked very well because to date, me and Charlie have not sought or secured any investment into the business. We've completely bootstrapped it for 5 years, which is quite interesting because I don't know how many other companies have done that 5 years in with the track record we've developed to date. A lot of them have
External
sister companies, mother companies. Like I'm surprised when I'm behind, they own 90% of this one or this one. So yeah, look, it's been tough, but I think me and Charlie was always of the view, like, let's add real tangible value to the business first, and then see what we want to do after
So you were able to kind of keep ownership between the founding partners.
Yes.
You were able to kind of, you managed to get the third parties to do a lot of speculative work in the run-up to exchange, where obviously you got a fee stream from capital partners that were funding it, which you could then pay them.
Exactly.
And so I guess the more deals you do, the more confidence the market has in terms of your ability to do deals and for people to go on the journey with you and see you as a trusted partner.
Yeah, and I think loyalty is really important to us. Like we only work with certain consultants, and like if they're a couple of grand more than somebody else, look, we've got an existing relationship. We'll pay the extra couple of grand because I think, like in this game, you need those relationships to not only get through the good times but the bad times. So we've got a fantastic team of support that we just leverage as and when and reward as we can as well.
So we talked about the first deal. Give me an overview of the business today, the portfolio, scale, and some of the numbers behind it.
It's a bit crazy, I'd probably say. So Ark, moving Ark to the side, that's 1,000 beds in operation. We then, after launching Ark, we then pivoted to land. The reason we pivoted to land is because no one else was buying land. And look, Reshape, 2-3 people, 0 track record. We're never going to buy land in a booming market. We're never going to be chosen over a London Square or a Regal. But everyone was sat on their hands to an extent, and whether they're consolidating, they're looking for the market to come back. And we was like, do you know what? We think we've got a chance here to buy land. So in the course, I think, of a 12-week period last year, we transacted on 2,500 beds. So we've got 222 beds in Watford. We've got 426 in Salford on the River Edge. We've also got 220 in what is Bethnal Green, London Fields. And then we was very fortunate to secure what is known as McBean Street, which is a scheme where we're delivering 900 PBSA beds and 425 co-living. And I think one of the things we're really proud about is all our schemes are policy compliant affordable housing offers as well.
Which means
that we're delivering either social homes as per planning policy, or we're delivering discount market rent. So when we speak to councils, we're saying whatever your affordable need is, we're going to meet that. And I think that's quite an important thing for us as a business. to make sure we're giving back.
And is that driven by you and your experience growing up?
I think I can only speak for my driver. I think most definitely. Look, I was raised in social housing. I know people that went from poor quality accommodation to good quality accommodation. I know people that have suffered from overcrowding. So fully appreciate that. But equally, Charlie's just very passionate about giving back as well. And although we had very different lives, I think our nature is what probably brings us together on those type of topics.
And in terms of funding that, you working with a multitude of different institutional capital partners on these particular sites, or do you have one party that backs all of them?
So we work with a number of different parties. Typically, we like to work with family offices or high net worths, often who are quite passive and just trust us to do what we're going to do in relation to coming up with like business plan and then getting the planning. So we work with a multitude of different family offices. We think there's benefit in competitive tension. In truth, I think Charlie's dream is one day someone just does it all for us, which will make his job a lot easier. But at this point, we think it makes sense to have that competitive tension.
To be able to work with multiple different parties on different sites and be able to take product to different people and then be able to kind of run and deliver it and build it out.
Exactly.
Tell me about the team and who's in the team and the size of the team and how you've gone about building it.
So obviously we got me and Charlie as the co-founders. Then we've got Robin Nightingale, who joined us just over a year, or probably a year and a half ago now. So he's an ex-main contractor. He was at Mace. He was also at the Collective. And look, in the current climate, your ability to demonstrate deliverability to funds is key, in particular with the gateways and the difficulties around building regulations at the moment. So we brought him on very early.
To help with Gateway 2 and then Gateway 3. And
to help with the Gateway 2, but also to help with our planning. Like, our whole business plan is to get to operation. So there is no merit in us getting planning permission for a scheme we can't build. And we was very mindful of that when we secured them 4 sites, that we needed that in-house expertise to complement the consultants we had. So that's why we brought Robbie in. We've also got Dan. So Dan is ex-Heitman, private equity background. Used to also worked at Lloyd's. So really strong finance investment background. Wizard with an Excel. Got no idea what he's doing on it, but everyone that we speak to, whether it's the funding partners, they always talk about how good his modelling is. And so I think that really then allows us to move that step towards becoming a more institutional business. I'm not saying we're there yet, but it's definitely a step in that direction. And then beyond that, we've got Phil, who was head of operations at Student Roost. So I think he was like number 6 in the business. He supports us on basically building our new OpCo strategy. And then we've got Chris Roche, who he's just, in a way, he's like a jack of all trades. Like
Swiss Army knife,
and does it way better than you could ever. So he built a whole new tech stack at the Canary Wharf asset. He's now responsible for our ESG and our brand and product. And then we've also got Belle, and Belle's our analyst, who's just an absolute grafter.
So you've got the kind of the key individuals across the kind of the internal service lines to enable you to build, to find more sites, fund them, and then develop them out.
Yeah, but also as well, I think, and I was talking earlier about this, I think it was to also become a business as well, in the sense that I think up until 2 years ago, me and Charlie was just me and Charlie. And I think until you have staff and you've got people to pass on responsibility to, and you're presenting yourself as a business, I think funds, JV partners, they will always see 2 individuals, 2 entrepreneurs as more chances, and in a good way. But I think you need that functionality of the back office to then be perceived to be a business and then grow. And I think it took me and Charlie a long time to work that out. But I think as soon as we realised it was something we needed to do, we was like, let's burden the load and actually start building a proper team.
Rather than try and own it and be the heroes, try and build and empower and build some infrastructure to enable you to focus on working on the business rather than getting sucked into it.
Yeah, exactly. And look, we didn't buy a single site when we was doing Ark in that year. It's probably a good thing because we'd have exited at a point where the market wasn't great. But it was that, look, we've put our heart and soul into this, but this has to be a one-off. We need to be more measured in what we put our time into, so we can strategically grow the business.
What's been the hardest thing in terms of setting the business up?
I think that the hardest thing is probably the thing that also makes it so great, is that it is an emotional roller coaster. I think you literally will get off a call and like look at each other like, we have made it. This is going to be fantastic. And then an hour later you'll have another call and you're like, oh my God, everything's going to crumble. I think there is an emotional roller coaster, and I think that's probably the hardest thing with the business, but it's something we thoroughly enjoy.
Do you think if we kind of rewind to you graduating in 2008, you would have done what you've done over the last 13, 14, God, it's way more than 13, 14 years. Kind of 18.
I think 17.
17, 18 years.
Really
Got my maths. Yeah,
mad.
17,
Yeah.
18 years. Do you think that you'd have had the journey that you have had and the success along the way?
Not necessarily. I think the decisions I made along the way is because I wanted to chase the unknown. So I never knew where I would end up.
You've just been really curious.
I've just been really curious, and I never wanted to know where my life could end up. So I always was willing to make the jump to see where I landed. And fortuitously, it's took me to this point. But no, I could never have envisioned it. And I'm sure I'll keep jumping as I move forward as well.
Yeah, I just get the sense you've gone down that part in terms of kind of working out the town planning, master planning, regeneration, and then through the council, and then the learnings, and then the movings. You've always been just trying to graft and work out, and then public sector, move to private sector, and then the kind of epiphany happens of actually, these people are the ones that are representing the money, and actually how and what does that look like, and the choice and the influence. And you've kind of been on this journey of trying to unpack and learn as you go.
Yeah.
And it's been fascinating. What advice would you give to someone who's earlier on in the journey, who comes from a similar background to you, who's kind of looking at real estate as a potential career opportunity, and who maybe doesn't quite know where to start or what to think?
Well, first of all, I said real estate can be very rewarding. I'd strongly recommend it. And I actually genuinely think it's probably one of the few sectors which can accommodate all types of skill sets. So whether or not you've got a flair for design, whether or not you're good with numbers, whether or not you're good with people, there is a role within real estate for you. I also think it's not the most accessible job to secure. It's quite challenging, but I think once you're in, you will thrive. I also think people from the types of environment that I'm from, I think we can use our uniqueness to an advantage. I think we see stuff differently. Sometimes there might be a bit more of a fight and a grit and a resilience. And I think with anything, whether it's sport or real estate, if you channel what makes you different and special, I think you can really benefit from that. And look, if you want to get into a sector, you've just got to be a pest. Like I think I wrote to Oldham Council like 15 times until they was like, you're not going in. And I'm like, I'm not. I need to work here for free. And I honestly think if you take that mindset to any industry, you will eventually knock on a door that will answer.
Incredible. So as we look forward, what does the future look like for you, Charlie, Reshaped and Ark?
So I think, as I said, hopefully Ark is like a thing that just gives itself now, and it grows and builds. I think with regards to Reshape, I think where we're at the moment, it's a very interesting time for us because we've got a pipeline of 2,000 beds. We're actually in legals on about 2,100 beds at the moment across 4 sites. So we could, by the end of the summer, have a pipeline of around 5,000 beds, which I don't think that many people have across co-living and PBSA. And I think what we're trying to decide is, what do we want Reshape to be? Do we take the route where you look at a Watkin Jones model, where you are delivering the projects and you look at basically floating the company? Do you look at an alternative model where we double down with our family office money? Or do we sell part of the business as a hook for institutional capital? So I think there's a lot of options we've got at the moment, and it's something that us and our new advisory board, which is a fantastic board, are really working on hard behind the scenes. But I think one thing I will say is that regardless of the route we take, I think we as a business now feel that we have a role to play. And I know we're a startup or an SME. I think we feel like we've got a genuine responsibility to deliver homes in this country in a time where there's a housing crisis. So the way I fought tooth and nail to get to where I am, we fight tooth and nail to get planning. We will fight tooth and nail to deliver them homes. We'll fight tooth and nail to put keys in people's hands. And if we can deliver 2,000 to 5,000 new homes across different use classes in the next 4 to 5 years, I think that's us pulling our weight in the industry and something we're really excited to do.
As we draw to a close, the question I ask everyone is, if I give you £500 million worth of capital,
Yes.
how would you allocate it?
Yes. So the first thing I thought is, what's the cost of the capital? Because if it's cheap, I might want to allocate some to reshape. In truth, given where our pipeline is at the moment for delivery.
I've deliberately kept it very broad.
I won't take it all. Look, I think in the current market, ground up development has a role to play in the allocation of that money. I think if you look at the current housing starts in London, it's really dire, and I think we're not going to hit the housing targets, and we're going to have only compounding impacts on housing supply issues. And I think anyone that's got a scheme that's viable and stacks, like genuinely viable, and can see that through delivery, people will come when you open the doors if your business plan is right. So I think there's a real strong play for ground up. I would say though as well, a number of opportunities where you're looking at existing use values, where it's like there's planning plays on those opportunities, but you're buying at the valuation. I'd probably allocate a lot of the money to that. And probably find businesses similar to Reshape, but maybe earlier on in the curve. I do think you're going to see a shift in and an evolution in real estate. I know it's always slower, but I think there's some fantastic young people coming through in the industry. They're going to be powered by AI. They're going to have a different lens. They're going to see stuff that we could never see and still don't see. And I think you've got to move with the times. I always think HMV is the biggest example. Like how they didn't become Netflix or they didn't become iTunes is a missed opportunity. And I think that's what we always need to be aware of. You've got to embrace the change. You've got to take advantage of it. And I'd make sure that some of that allocation is backing the right people, that vision.
Jermaine, phenomenal background, incredible career, and bucket loads of energy, grit, and determination. But like properly, I know those words get bandied around, but you're absolutely overflowing with that, and I get the sense that you're just as passionate now as you always have been, and you're just starting too. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming and sharing a little bit about your journey, your background, and what you and the business are going to look to do moving forward. It sounds like an incredibly exciting time, and I'll be looking on from the sidelines, wishing you well, and excited to see what you guys are going to build.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me again.
Hey, quick one from me. If you enjoyed this conversation, do me a favour and share it with a friend or colleague that you think would get value from this conversation. It would mean the world and help grow the People Property Place podcast. Thank you so much.